Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Thursday. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, the Lakers have made a trade, and it's not necessarily the trade we were counting on, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. Patrick Beverley is on his way back to LA, this time in a Lakers uniform. What does it mean for the purple and gold? That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how you get your podcasts or where, always free, never behind a paywall. I want to let everybody know and remind everybody we're only 2 days away from our big show, August 27th, taping a live mailbag episode of Locked On Lakers at the Dewar Store, 170 South La Brea in Los Angeles. We will be pulling the name of another winner of a Dewar prize pack. Anybody who submitted a question good enough to get onto that mailbag episode is eligible to win, and we will be pulling a name of another winner later. If you can come by on Saturday, though, you got a chance to win yourself some prizes as well and to participate in the show. Hope to see you there. Andy, we had fully intended on taking Thursday off. We weren't going to work. We were going to have a little 1 day break. And then what about 8:30 rolls around? The Lakers made a trade.
Yep. Patrick Beverley coming to the Lakers, Talen Horton-Tucker, and Stanley Johnson going to Utah. You and I talked about actually on Wednesday's show that we thought Utah could potentially be a trade partner option for the Lakers, but we both thought that before the Lakers started potentially getting some of the ancillary pieces on the Jazz, which Patrick Beverley was one of them after getting traded there in the offseason from the Timberwolves, that the Donovan Mitchell trade might need to happen before the Lakers, if nothing else, could make a big trade with Utah. But I guess whether they're keeping Donovan Mitchell or not, they've decided that Patrick Beverley is expendable.
Right. I mean, it's a shot in the dark for Utah. Just take a chance on THT. Perhaps they can develop him in ways that the Lakers couldn't or wouldn't. I would one recommendation. We'll get to some of this because, oh my God, the Lakers mismanaged the THT thing. If the Jazz though want to develop THT, I would not recommend trading for Russell Westbrook as well later in the summer. That's just not going to work out
unless you're going to buy him out.
Right. But don't try to play him together.
If you're going to buy him out, that's fine. Also, I guess, you could say they have an opportunity to develop Stanley Johnson. His time with the Lakers was pretty positive.
So, we'll get to the THT stuff and we'll get to what might be coming next. But let's talk about Patrick Beverley and what he brings to the Lakers, how he fits, and all of that. We're talking about a guy, he's 34 years old, but certainly a high motor, high intensity player. I tweeted out something from ESPN Stats and Info, very good on-ball defender in terms of limiting opponents last year. And for a team like the Lakers that was starving for any kind of defensive profile at all, you can start picking apart the vagaries of defensive statistics and all that kind of stuff. I get it all. Pat Beverley is an upgrade over what they were doing last year. I don't think there's any question about that.
With the possible exception of Austin Reeves really taking a big second-year step in his development as a defender, and both of us think he has a good foundation, Patrick Beverley is by far the best defensive guard on the Lakers, and it's not even close. You can argue that it's not a compliment.
Right. You could say you're fourth, but
right.
Andy.
But still, it's a really big upgrade. He's also an upgrade in terms of the energy that you're looking to bring to this team. And, you saw what happened with the Timberwolves last season. And while I think that they were potentially moving in the right direction just with Anthony Edwards' improvement, Karl Anthony Towns' improvement, Patrick Beverley was widely credited for just bringing a shot of urgency to a team that had desperately needed it culturally. Patrick Beverley had also been openly lobbying to become a Laker this
Oh
summer.
yeah,
I
no,
mean,
he absolutely wants to be with this team, and that's a and you know
you really know how much he wants it, Brian, because that guy never lets go of a slight. And people may not know this. They drafted Patrick Beverley in 2009 in the second round and then traded him on draft day.
Forgot about that.
To the Heat. And I believe Beverley did actually carry a grudge about that. But, 13 years have passed.
Right.
Water under the bridge.
So I mean, look, and
Just
obviously,
Clippers now.
while you can certainly argue that Pat Bev periodically gives off sort of odd, tweaky vibes on the floor and does some strange things. The Lakers were a team that widely were seen as lacking a certain edge to them last year, lacking a certain something. And Beverly will bring that. And it is nice that it doesn't have to come from LeBron every night. It's certainly nice that it doesn't have to come from AD every night, because that is not necessarily something that Davis particularly is great at. I don't think anybody's really buying what Russ is selling at this point when it comes to intensity and that regard, certainly not on the defensive side. So, there's a lot that makes sense about him. He has, through most of his career, the last, whatever it is, 5 or 6 years of it, 7 years of it at least, been an excellent 3-point shooter. No lower than 38%, sometimes clearing 40%. Very consistent in that regard as well. Until last season. Last season, he only shot 34.5% from 3-point range. And, whenever a guy has a bit of a fall off and he's into his sort of mid 30s, and Beverly's going to turn 34 this year, I believe. Already is 34. So that's a little bit concerning. But if that's a blip, he also does a lot to improve the outside shooting. That's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, he actually had last season one of the best 2-point percentages of his whole career, and he ended up shooting just under 41% from the field. So it really lets you know, just, given the ratio of threes that he takes, how much that lower 3-point percentage really hurt him.
I'm not going to write a guy off for one down shooting season after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight seasons between 38 and 40. I'm just saying, I would feel better about it if he were 27 as opposed to 34.
No, you and I were talking about this before the show started, and we were going a little bit back and forth about just his defensive effectiveness, at this stage of his career, because that's really how he's made his career in the first place. And we were talking before about how just on a team like Minnesota that was fine defensively, but not great, and certainly didn't have a lot of great individual defenders, I think it can be difficult to gauge how much of his individual metrics dropping a bit is.
Yeah, I mean, this can be very hard to quantify as teams change. The Clippers teams that he played with were filled with excellent defenders.
Right. But the part that jumped out at me when we were talking about this in terms of, that's a bit more of a concern, was the 3-point percentage. The flip side is, in terms of things that were positive for him offensively last year, highest assists per 36 minutes of his career, 6.5, which, this is a team with a decent amount of ball movers, but that could make for a nice secondary playmaker alongside LeBron. I mean, he's not a traditional high-end run your offense possession after possession point guard, but he's certainly solid, and he's somebody that I think can be really helpful in keeping the offense flowing but still in rhythm in different ways than, say, we'll get into Russ's future with the team. Russell Westbrook is, it's not debatable, he is a better point guard than Patrick Beverley, and it's not even close, but he's also more of a disruptive point guard in terms of your overall possessions and the overall offense.
It's a different deal. Like,
right.
You're not running Pat Beverley's not a run your offense kind of guy. Like,
right.
You don't put the ball in his hands with that kind of usage rate.
No, but he's somebody that I think can keep what you're doing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for
going
sure.
Pretty steady.
So, let's do this real quick. I mean, look, the legacy of THT and all of that, and, upside and whatever, from a positional standpoint, the Lakers add a guard, which is a position they didn't necessarily need, and trade a 2-3 in THT and a 3-4 in Stanley. which are much more positions of, I guess, need relative less depth in those two places. And so I've seen some people reacting to that. But the flip side is neither one of those guys necessarily had defined roles in a 10-man rotation this year for the Lakers.
It's more certain what you're doing with Patrick Beverley, and
Correct.
and his role is more defined. And he's also, we've talked before about not knowing exactly who could close games. Patrick Beverley is likely a closer on this team.
I would agree.
THT and Stanley Johnson, I think Stanley had specific matchups that he could be very uniquely useful on this team, like in terms of bigger wings and, guys where his strength and, I that energy and I think actually pretty good defensive instincts would have been handy. And both of us really like the story of Stanley last year.
I like the story of Stanley much more than the player. I mean, relative to a lot of Lakers fans, I was less enamored with the actual play of Stanley Johnson and his potential impact than some. I just love the guy. He's a wonderful person.
Yeah, I think I was higher on him as an actual player than you are. So we're going to get into the THT's tenure here later in the show, but the Lakers had every incentive to find minutes for THT, whether to justify their faith in him, justify their decisions with him, showcase him, whatever. This is indicative, if nothing else, there's book clearing all this stuff, but it's them, I think, recognizing we don't know for sure he's going to get in the rotation, and that's only going to bring his trade value lower.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So a lot of supposition that this could be the first move of something that comes next. It certainly would make some sense. So let's talk about that. What comes next now for the Lakers? And as Andy said later on the show, oh my God, did they mismanage this THT thing? So all that next.
All right, so you're hanging out with some friends and you're putting back a few drinks, and a few drinks becomes too many. And as the evening comes to an end, people start to head out. You're thinking of calling for a ride, but then you say, nah, you know what? I live nearby. I can make it home okay. It's not a big deal. And look, what are the odds I'm going to get pulled over anyway? And even if I did, what's the worst that could happen? My insurance goes up. I lose my license, lose my job, total my car, injure myself, kill someone else. I mean, you can see where this is going. And everybody knows the risks of drunk driving. The results, tragic. They're often deadly. But that doesn't stop people still from getting behind the wheel while they're under the influence. And that's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads, and it's to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, just think again, play it safe, plan ahead, get a ride home. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. So drive sober or get pulled over.
All right, so a lot to unpack here for the Lakers about what they do next. But Andy, first, before we do that, we have to unpack the magic hat that tells us who's going to win this second prize pack from Dewar. Again, Saturday, August 27th, 11 a.m., 170 South La Brea. If you are in the neighborhood, come in. You can be part of a show, win yourself some Dewar clothes and all that kind of stuff. Andy, pull a name of our second prize pack winner. It is... This is your username either on Twitter or on the Locked On Lakers YouTube page. Who wins?
Greg Van.
Greg Van.
V-A-N-N. Greg Van. You are the second winner. Congratulations, man.
You won a Dewar prize pack. So we'll tweet that out. Hey, Greg Van, find us. We'll put it on the Locked On Lakers YouTube page. Hey, Greg Van, find us. You can send us an email. And you can hit us up on Twitter at Cam Brothers. We'll find you. We'll make sure you get your Dewar prize pack. All right. So, Andy, there are a lot of people who believe that Patrick Beverley's arrival in Los Angeles is the first of moves coming for the Lakers. Russell Westbrook, perhaps to Indiana or somewhere, because for starters, Russell Westbrook and Patrick Beverley hate each other.
Yes.
They have like a long history of not of like goofy sports beef, but like legit problems.
Let me run this down for people who are not completely familiar with this very open feud between Russell Westbrook and Patrick Beverley. It began, presumably, to the best of everybody's knowledge, 2003 playoff series. Russ was on the Thunder. Beverley was on the Rockets. Westbrook called timeout, and Patrick Beverley collided into his knee. He ended up tearing Russell Westbrook's meniscus. Russ had several surgeries. They exchanged words again. We maybe other times, but we know it happened in 2018 on a play where Patrick Beverley dove for a ball, crashed into Russell Westbrook's legs again. Then Russell Westbrook in 2019 had this quote about Patrick Beverley. Pat Bev trick y'all, man, like he playing defense. He don't guard nobody, man. He just running around doing nothing. That got a ton of play. Probably a little bit more feuding, but then cut to last season where Russell Westbrook has an absolutely miserable game against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Patrick Beverley during this game, after a Westbrook miss and the ball was out of bounds, started holding his nose. Like, Russell Westbrook stinks this bad, I'm holding my nose, and actually called Russell Westbrook trash in this game. Said trash, referring to him. Then he was on the Old Man and the Three podcast. JJ
I actually found that to be one of the more entertaining nights of last season, but that's neither here nor there.
He tweeted out before this appearance, I remember when somebody said, all I do is run around and trick y'all. Well, my boy is the real magician this year, referring to Russ and the magic trick of turning into a really unplayable basketball player at times. And he said, people look at me different after Westbrook's comments. After that, people were like, just taking the ball, just going at me. And I'm like, what the bleep? All because one person said, people were like, yeah, maybe this mother bleeper doesn't play defense. All he does is run around. And then he said, he damaged my career. Coaching staffs and players, fans, they looked at me way different. They looked at me like, you know what? He don't play defense. He just yells and runs around, and held on to that and held on to that. And some people still do. So this is like this might be the most open feud, not just currently in the NBA.
It's the biggest one that I can remember. Like, I think if you did a poll, and like a snap poll of NBA fans, and asked them to name like an open feud, like, or a feud between NBA players. So no, this has been enduring, like you said, starting in 2013 and when moving on. And two guys who are notoriously hard-headed and grudge-bearing and all that. So like the idea that they're just like, oh, we're on the same team now, we just bury it. Like, now that said, so there are a lot of people believe, because the Lakers are trying to do this anyway, that Russell Westbrook is out the door. I would hope, just for my own entertainment, maybe the Lakers could put that off. Give me 4 games. Like, give me 5 games. I'm not saying you can line all your ducks up. You can do everything that you need to do. I understand the need to prepare. But don't you think, even like, let's say, like, is it Kevin Pritchard still in Indiana? Who the hell knows? I can't remember this. No, he's long gone, but maybe he's not. I don't know. But whoever's in charge over there, can we just arrange it and be like, you guys want to see this too, right? You want to see a little bit of this, don't you? I feel like we're all kind of owed just 5 games of those two guys on the same team, and then make your trade.
I remember when LeBron signed his extension, I said that I did not think that was a definitive sign that Russell Westbrook was gone. You know, like the idea that the Lakers promised him, well, if you sign this extension, come hell or high water, Russell Westbrook is definitely off this team. We owe that to you now. I'm like, okay, that's reading too much into this. I'm feeling much more confident now that if you put 2 guys on the same team, that it will literally turn into blood sport if they spend any time on the same roster. This is feeling like Russ is gone.
It does.
I mean,
it does.
This doesn't feel tenable. Like, it just doesn't feel realistic, especially if Russ is like, F it, man. I don't need to impress
Russ,
these guys
out of here anyway. No, so it feels
Beverley's
like
on a 1-year. Beverley's only on a 1-year deal too.
Right. And that's actually an important thing. By the way, Kevin Pritchard is president of basketball operations. Chad Buchanan is the GM. Know your Indiana Pacers front office. So but that's the other thing is from a financial standpoint, this does actually impact this summer. I know you and I have talked a lot about not being precious about this stuff and whatever, but it was a stone cold lock based on what the roster was currently looking like, that THT was going to pick up that option for next year, because he wasn't going to play enough to increase his value likely in any meaningful way. Pat Bev is off the books next year. Jovan Buha noted that the Lakers this really does, and Johan Buha of The Athletic, I should say, this means the Lakers could have as little as, he says, $89 million in salary for 23-24. The projected cap is $133 million. So, I mean, obviously it's never that neat. It's never that clean, but it would give the Lakers significantly more space to work with and enough to go get a, high end free agents or absorb the contracts of players. So this actually is a meaningfully good trade for flexibility.
Depending on what comes next.
Depending on what comes next. But even if they don't make another trade, I think they're better with Beverley than they would have been with THT. And
no argument. I'm talking pure just the flexibility. Like if they make this deal for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, that I think a lot of people are assuming is the next potential step, it would make sense on a few fronts, not the least of which is they could use a wing. They could use someone of Buddy Hield's size, and Miles Turner, AD, they could play together. But Buddy Hield, his deal goes on this season and the following. And then if you're going to presumably trade one or maybe even both of your first round picks, you're going to be looking to extend Miles Turner.
Right. And it's nothing else. He's a cap hold until you do.
Right. So it's potentially more cap space, not definitively, but optionality matters.
Sure. And so, that's something to think about. But I mean, if let's ask this, and then we'll do we'll get to THT. Let's say that it is the deal that people are thinking about. It is Hield and Turner, Westbrook goes out the door, the picks and whatever. But functionally, you have now traded Stanley Johnson, THT, and Westbrook for Patrick Beverley, Buddy Hield, Miles Turner. Two-part question: Is that a win in terms of real roster improvement, and is it improvement enough to make the Lakers players, so to speak?
It's definitely improvement. That is the roster becoming, I would say, significantly better than it was just a week ago. Buddy Hield adds shooting. As much as I'm not a big fan of him overall as a player, but if he is, say, surrounded by Anthony Davis and Miles Turner and Patrick Beverley and LeBron with a little more freedom to pick his spots or be a more effective rover back, you can cover for a lot of Buddy Hield's deficiencies. I like Miles Turner as a player. I just get nervous about his health. And Patrick Beverley, I think he definitely will help them defensively in the backcourt. And also, I think he's a very good fit for how they're going to play, period. So it's definitely better. Like we said, Russell Westbrook was a bad fit, would have played a lot, assuming he didn't end up getting, I guess, sent home at some point over the course of the season. And we weren't sure if Stanley Johnson and THT were going to play at all or much.
Right.
They were not definitive.
You're adding three players who are going to make, who are going to be really important for one guy who would have played a lot, but you'd prefer he not, and two guys who might not have played much at all.
Yeah, they're definitively better. As far as better enough to become true contenders, I need to see it. I need to see what it looks like, because I think they are still lacking in overall talent compared to some of the other teams around the league. Like, the gap between LeBron, AD, and I guess whoever you consider the third best player, probably Miles Turner or Buddy Hield, maybe on his best shooting day, maybe Kendrick Nunn if he improves on what we saw in his second year in Miami, versus the number 3 guy on some of those other contenders, I think is pretty notable. But they also look like a team that if they gel, you wouldn't want to play them. They're a team you take seriously.
I'd be willing again, I got to think about it more or whatever, but it elevates them, I think, at least, to where instead of playing, we're talking about top 6. Let's talk about THT. Because we both wish him well. And there's still talent there, and there's still stuff that he can do. And I still think he's going to have a pretty good long NBA career. Oh my God, this is a horrible end for the Lakers when it comes to THT, and we'll explain why next. But first, Locked On Lakers is brought to you by BetOnline.net. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find your favorite sports and events, the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. Odds, lines, and games. I don't know why my voice just did that. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. Find out if Patrick Beverley's arrival will impact the Lakers' title odds. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live game, in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. Whatever it is, they've got you covered. So head on to BetOnline today, or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. We made a pretty big deal, Andy, that the Lakers probably chose the wrong guy between Alex Caruso and THT if they had to choose, which, by the way, they did not. But when you start to unpack, like, everything that the Lakers did and did not do with THT, oh my God, this is tragically bad asset management. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't have traded him, because it's a sunk cost at this point, and cut your losses. Don't hold on to it because of pride or whatever. But that does not mean that the path that we have been on to get here doesn't matter, because, man, they screwed this up.
Yeah, I mean, it begins with not giving him a 3-year deal when they first drafted him and signed him to begin with, because they wouldn't have been in a position so early on of having to not just pay him, but let's be honest, pay a clutch client.
Pay a clutch client and put themselves in a disadvantageous position of having that option year hanging over them. As you pointed out earlier in the week, like, it wasn't impossible to see a scenario where the Lakers would have to use a first rounder, if they had one, to create space in some scenario to move THT, which would have been tragic.
Right. And then they had the self-imposed decision financially between, and presumably basketball-y, between THT and Alex Caruso. And on both counts, frankly, they chose wrong. And you could look at the need to bring in Beverley in a lot of respects as replacing Alex Caruso to begin with. They could have had a younger version of Patrick Beverley, not quite the three-point shooter, but a much more athletic, a rising defender, as opposed to a defender who's going to be more in decline. I think, assuming Alex
Caruso does, other than shooting, there's not anything I would rather have Pat Beverley for, other than, I guess, maybe edge, in your locker room. But Caruso brings a lot of that too.
Right. And in the meantime, he's younger. He is more ascending. He is developing as a point guard. They essentially are replacing Alex Caruso with Patrick Beverley, which, as you said before, at some point it's sunken cost. You look to recover. I think, Patrick Beverley is a quality replacement along these lines, but
that's not good.
And it brings to mind, this is something I know I've raised a lot over the last couple of years, the question of how much the clutch factor breaks ties, because their mid-level exceptions have all been clutch guys the last few years. Montrezl Harrell, Kendrick Nunn, Lonnie Walker IV. They've had this decision with Talen Horton-Tucker as far as the setup of his contract that was favorable towards a clutch client. When they signed Max Christie, after seeing what the position that they put themselves in potentially with Austin Reeves, who was undrafted, and they gave him another 2-year deal, and now he's going to be coming up on free agency potentially quicker than you would want. You have less control over him. Max Christie has another one of those type of deals. Maybe they could have gotten him a longer one, but that could have eaten into the mid-level exception that you gave Lonnie Walker. So
it's just,
I can't say definitively that all of these things are related, but I can say it makes me wonder a lot.
And THT,
a lot of coincidences.
They wouldn't include THT in a deal for Kyle Lowry, that you go back and rewind what that might have looked like, and you make the investment in THT, and then kneecap it by acquiring Russell Westbrook and making it almost impossible for that investment to really work. I mean,
also too,
we recognize when they made the Westbrook trade that this was going to make it hard on THT because those two guys can't play together.
But more than that, though, and this was something I remember I had mentioned when they gave THT the contract, because that was after they had acquired Russell Westbrook and let Alex Caruso go. If they had that much faith in THT in terms of his development, because that was a big commitment that they were making.
Yes, it was.
For a player that, again, both of us like his potential.
And I still like I don't think THT is a bad player. I think he was a player who was going to be blocked from developing here.
Right.
Which is a real problem, because these are the people who signed him and are ostensibly in charge of his development.
But I remember at the time when one of the shows we were doing around this time with THT's contract, when it was announced what it was going to be, if they had that much faith in THT being able to really take a step forward where he could be a key part of a championship level roster, because that is exactly what they were both paying him to do and earmarking him to do, it raised the question of, why are you bringing in Russell Westbrook in the first place? Like, forget the idea of blocking THT. What's the need for Westbrook? If you think that THT is this far along on his path as a very similar player to Russell Westbrook, why are you bringing in Westbrook at all?
Yeah, I don't know. That may be an overstatement of how good they thought he was and is and could be and all that. I mean, I get what you're getting at.
They earmarked a big role for him.
Right. But I mean, there's still a difference. A lot of this is just how good they clearly thought Russell Westbrook was still in, capital R, capital W.
No, but they also
like
clearly
caps,
thought
Westbrook.
THT was ready to be a big
contributor, but not necessarily a level of if you believe Westbrook is an uber star, then, which is a whole other thing, obviously. But if you believe Westbrook is still that caliber of player, then you can both of those. I'm less critical for that, because I think that's too big of a leap for THT. Even if you have a lot of confidence in him, maybe you believe he can develop, there's still a big gap between what we think he can do as a developing player and playing a big role in contributing versus being one of the elite players in the NBA.
I guess what I'm saying is,
but don't take the guy who's the elite player in the NBA and then put him in front of your guy so you can't develop it.
How much, I guess my question would be, how much do you actually think he's going to be playing and contributing and having that big of a role if you're bringing in Russ in the first place? You can't have this both ways.
Or it's just shocking mismanagement that you think you could then take THT and we'll just use him in a different way. But or
the 3-and-D wing.
Or he will just we'll sacrifice it to the altar of our stars. No, there's no breakdown. At some point, look, this is a good recovery. This is a positive recovery. Trading Westbrook and getting the deal, if you get some protections, maybe you get an extra player back or whatever. Like, in a vacuum, even if it costs you a pick or two, if you get Miles Turner, it's like, that's not a terrible recovery. But at some point, and I'm well past it, but at some point, you no longer get credit for doing a decent job at undoing bad mistakes. Because they don't go 2 steps forward and 2 steps back and 3 steps forward. It's you make the mistake and then you kind of recover maybe half of that position back. These are all backward steps. And so kind of the breakdown when THT as a saga, a cautionary tale, whatever it is, it's really bad. And I think it is a moment to both praise the Lakers for undoing some mistakes and making the team better this year, which is something they need to do. But you cannot overlook how horribly they managed this part of it to get to this point. All right. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show and see us do it. Locked On Lakers will be at the Doer Store on August 27th. That's Saturday, 2 days from now, at 11 a.m. Come by, ask us some questions, be part of a big mailbag show, and maybe win yourself some prizes. In theory, we might take Friday off, but who knows? Maybe the Lakers won't let us. We were supposed to take Thursday off, and here we are. But yeah, we'll see everybody next time.